David never imagined his life would change so dramatically. Just 5 years ago, he was working 16-hour days in a cramped garage, surviving on instant noodles and cheap coffee. His fingers were always stained with ink from sketching out ideas on napkins, and his laptop was held together with duct tape. Back then, his biggest worry was whether he could afford rent for another month. The idea came to him during one of those sleepless nights when he was trying to solve a problem that had been bothering him for months. Companies were struggling to understand what their customers really wanted, and traditional surveys weren't giving them real answers. David realized that artificial intelligence could analyze customer behavior in ways no one had ever tried before. He started small, reaching out to local businesses and offering to help them for free just to test his theory. The first few attempts were disasters. His code crashed, his presentations were terrible, and most business owners looked at him like he was crazy. But David kept pushing forward because he knew he was onto something big. The breakthrough moment happened on a rainy Tuesday morning. David had been working with a small restaurant chain that was struggling to understand why some locations were successful while others weren't. His AI system analyzed everything from customer reviews to weather patterns to social media posts. Within hours, it had identified patterns that the restaurant owners had missed for years. The results were incredible. The restaurant owners followed the AI's recommendations and saw their profits increase by 40% within 3 months. Word spread quickly in the business community. Soon, David's phone was ringing nonstop with companies wanting to try his system. What started as a one-person operation in a garage quickly grew into something much bigger. David hired his first employee, then 5 more, then 20. He moved from the garage to a small office, then to a larger building downtown. Every few months, he had to find more space because the team kept growing. The technology world started paying attention when David's company helped a struggling retail chain avoid bankruptcy. His AI had predicted market trends 6 months ahead of everyone else, allowing the company to adjust their inventory and marketing strategy just in time. The story made headlines in business magazines, and suddenly everyone wanted to know who this young entrepreneur was. Investment offers started pouring in from venture capital firms. David had meetings with people whose names he had only seen in business journals. They talked about millions of dollars like it was pocket change and promised to help him build a global empire. The numbers they mentioned made his head spin, but David knew this was his chance to take his idea to the next level. Within 18 months, David's small startup had transformed into a company worth over $1 billion. His AI platform was being used by Fortune 500 companies around the world. The technology could predict consumer behavior with frightening accuracy, helping businesses make decisions that saved them millions of dollars. The success was overwhelming. David found himself on the cover of major magazines, being called a visionary and a genius. Television shows wanted to interview him, and universities invited him to speak at graduation ceremonies. He was invited to exclusive conferences where he rubbed shoulders with CEOs, politicians, and celebrities. His personal life changed just as dramatically. David moved from a tiny apartment to a penthouse in the city's most expensive building. His garage sale furniture was replaced with designer pieces that cost more than most people's cars. He had a personal assistant to manage his schedule, a driver to take him anywhere he needed to go, and access to private jets for international travel. The awards kept coming. Business magazines named him Entrepreneur of the Year. Technology conferences gave him Lifetime Achievement Awards. Universities offered him honorary degrees. David's office was filled with crystal trophies and framed certificates, each one representing another milestone in his incredible journey. But perhaps the most satisfying moment was when David realized he had created something that was genuinely changing the world. His AI wasn't just helping businesses make money, it was helping them serve their customers better. Hospitals used his technology to predict patient needs. Environmental organizations used it to track climate patterns. Educational institutions used it to understand how students learned best. The financial success was beyond anything David had ever dreamed of. His bank account had more zeros than he could have imagined 5 years earlier. He could buy anything he wanted without thinking about the price. Luxury cars, expensive watches, exotic vacations, everything was within reach. International recognition followed quickly. David was invited to speak at conferences in London, Tokyo, and Dubai. World leaders sought his advice on technology policy. Major news networks featured him in documentaries about innovation and entrepreneurship. He had become a global symbol of what was possible with hard work and big ideas. The company's growth seemed unstoppable. New offices opened in different countries every few months. The team grew from 20 people to hundreds, then thousands. Each quarterly report showed record-breaking profits and expansion into new markets. Competitors tried to copy David's approach, but his team was always several steps ahead. David's typical day now started with a briefing from his executive team about developments around the world. His calendar was packed with meetings with investors, government officials, and other business leaders. Lunch meetings happened at exclusive restaurants where reservations were impossible to get. Evening events were held at private clubs and luxury hotels. The transformation was complete when David looked around his corner office one evening as the sun was setting over the city skyline. The view was spectacular, showing him the urban landscape he had conquered through sheer determination and innovation. His reflection in the window showed a man wearing a custom-tailored suit that cost more than his old monthly salary. On his desk sat letters from charities asking for donations, invitations to exclusive events, and proposals for new business ventures. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from journalists, investors, and other entrepreneurs seeking his advice. The young man who used to worry about paying rent was now someone whose decisions affected thousands of jobs and millions of dollars, yet something felt different that evening. Among all the congratulatory messages and business proposals on his phone, there were other notifications that seemed somehow more important but easier to ignore. A missed call from his wife asking when he would be home for dinner. A text from his 8-year-old daughter wondering if Daddy would be able to read her a bedtime story tonight. A reminder about his son's soccer game scheduled for Saturday morning. David looked at these personal messages for a long moment before setting his phone down and returning to the stack of contracts waiting for his signature. Success demanded sacrifices, he told himself. His family would understand that all this hard work was for them, to secure their future and give them opportunities he never had growing up. The bedtime stories and soccer games could wait. There would be time for those things later. Once the business was fully established and running smoothly, as the city lights began twinkling below his office window, David felt like he truly was on top of the world. He had everything he had ever wanted: wealth, recognition, power, and the respect of his peers. The scared young man eating instant noodles in a garage seemed like a character from someone else's story. This was his moment of triumph, the peak of success that made all the struggles worthwhile. He had no idea that the most difficult test of his life was just beginning. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Wednesday morning that started like any other. David was rushing through breakfast, checking emails on his phone while gulping down coffee, when his 8-year-old daughter tugged on his sleeve. She had been practicing for weeks for her school play and wanted to show him her costume one more time before the big performance that evening. "Not now, sweetheart," David said without looking up from his phone. "Daddy has an important meeting with some people from Japan. We'll talk about it later, okay?" His daughter's face fell, but she nodded quietly and went back to her cereal. David didn't notice the disappointment in her eyes because he was already reading urgent messages about a server crash that was affecting customers in 3 different time zones. That evening, David found himself in a conference room with executives who had flown halfway around the world to discuss a potential partnership. The numbers they were talking about were staggering, hundreds of millions of dollars that could expand his company into entire new markets. As they debated contract details and market projections, David completely forgot about his daughters. School play, he only remembered when his wife called during a brief break in the meeting. Her voice was quiet but strained as she told him how their daughter had kept looking toward the empty seat where Daddy was supposed to be sitting. After the play ended, other kids ran to hug their parents, but she just stood there on stage, searching the audience one more time before finally accepting that he wasn't coming. "I had to tell her you had an emergency at work," his wife said. "She asked me if your work was more important than watching her be a princess. I didn't know what to say." David felt a knot form in his stomach, but the Japanese executives were already returning to the conference room. He promised to make it up to his daughter and ended the call. The partnership deal was too important to lose focus now. There would be other school plays, he told himself. This opportunity might not come again. Over the following months, the pattern repeated itself in different ways. David missed his son's championship soccer game because of an emergency board meeting. He showed up 2 hours late to his wedding anniversary dinner because investors from London had called with concerns about market volatility. His wife sat alone at the restaurant, fielding curious looks from other diners, until David finally arrived with his phone still buzzing with messages. "I'm sorry," became David's most frequently used phrase at home. Sorry for missing bedtime stories. Sorry for forgetting parent-teacher conferences. Sorry for canceling weekend family trips because of last-minute business crises. Each apology felt sincere when he said it, but they started sounding hollow even to his own ears. His wife began adapting to his absence in ways that made David uncomfortable when he bothered to notice. She stopped asking him about his day because she knew he was too distracted to listen properly. She started making all the parenting decisions alone, from which school activities the kids could join to what punishments they received for misbehavior. She became like a single parent who happened to live with someone who paid the bills. The children adapted too, but not in ways that made David feel good about his choices. His son stopped asking if Daddy would come to his games, already knowing the answer would be disappointing. His daughter began drawing pictures of their family that showed Mommy and the two kids together, with Daddy as a tiny figure in the corner talking on a phone. When David saw these drawings stuck to the refrigerator, he told himself it was just a phase. Kids don't understand how hard adults have to work to provide for them. Meanwhile, David's business demands grew more intense every month. The company was expanding so rapidly that new crises emerged faster than old ones could be solved. A security breach in the European division required weeks of 18-hour days. A lawsuit from a competitor meant endless meetings with lawyers. A hostile takeover attempt from a rival company turned every day into a strategic battle for survival. David's assistant started managing his personal life through calendar appointments. Family dinner appeared in his schedule like any other meeting, often getting moved or canceled when something more urgent came up. Birthday parties were scheduled around conference calls. Vacation plans existed only as calendar entries that got deleted when business emergencies arose. The physical toll was becoming obvious. David's hairline started receding from stress, and he developed dark circles under his eyes from chronic sleep deprivation. He survived on energy drinks and protein bars, eating real meals only during business lunches. His doctor warned him about high blood pressure and recommended reducing stress, but David laughed at the suggestion. How could he reduce stress when thousands of jobs depended on his decisions? His wife started expressing her concerns more directly. During their increasingly rare moments alone together, she would point out how the children barely knew their father anymore. She reminded him that success meant nothing if it cost him his family's love and respect, but David always had a ready answer. Everything he was doing was for them, to secure their financial future and give them opportunities he never had growing up. "Just give me 2 more years," David would promise. "Once the company goes public, I can step back and delegate more, and then we'll have all the time in the world together." But his wife wasn't convinced. She had heard similar promises before, and each deadline just led to new goals and bigger challenges. The company kept growing, but so did the demands on David's time and attention. She began to suspect that there would always be another crisis, another opportunity, another reason why family had to wait. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. That David had promised to keep free for family time. He was supposed to take his son to soccer practice and then spend the afternoon at the park with both kids. His wife had been looking forward to a few hours to herself, something she rarely got anymore. At 7 in the morning, David's phone started ringing. A major client was threatening to cancel their contract over a technical issue, and the entire sales team was in panic mode. The client was based in Australia, which meant David had only a few hours to resolve the situation before their business day ended. David found himself back in his home office, still wearing pajamas, frantically organizing video calls with his technical team. His son came to the doorway in his soccer uniform, ball in hand, waiting for Daddy to take him to practice. David held up one finger, signaling him to wait just one more minute. But that minute stretched into an hour, then 2 hours, eventually. His wife had to take their son to practice herself, but not before David saw the disappointment in the boy's eyes. It was the same look his daughter had given him the night of her school play. That expression would haunt David for weeks afterward. But in the moment, he convinced himself that saving $1 million contract was more important than one soccer practice by evening. David had resolved the crisis and saved the client relationship. But the victory felt hollow when he came downstairs to find his family eating dinner without him. The kids had gotten used to Daddy's empty chair at the table. His wife served his plate without comment, but David could see the resignation in her face. That night, as David finally went to bed at midnight after responding to emails from 3 different continents, he found a drawing his daughter had left on his pillow. It showed their house with Mommy and 2 kids standing outside, waving goodbye to a tiny figure of Daddy disappearing into an office building. The message was clear, even to someone who had been too busy to pay attention. His family was starting to feel like strangers in their own home, and David was becoming a ghost, who occasionally appeared to write checks and say sorry for missing another important moment. But even as he recognized the problem, David told himself that the sacrifices were temporary. Success required dedication, and he was building something that would benefit his family for generations. He just needed to work a little harder, close a few more deals, and reach the next milestone. Then everything would go back to normal. He had no idea how wrong he was or how much worse things were about to get. The phone call that would change everything came on a Monday morning when David was already running late for a board meeting. The voice on the other end belonged to Richard Hamilton, one of the most powerful investors in Asia. David had heard stories about Hamilton for years, how he could make or break companies with a single decision, how billionaires would fly across the world just to have lunch with him. "I've been watching your company very carefully," Hamilton said in his crisp British accent. "I think it's time we had a serious conversation about your future." Within 24 hours, David found himself on a private jet heading to Singapore. He had never experienced anything like this level of luxury, leather seats that reclined into beds, a personal chef, and internet fast enough to run his entire business from 30,000 feet in the air. As the plane soared over the Pacific Ocean, David couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. The meeting took place in a glass tower that seemed to touch the clouds above Singapore's skyline. Hamilton's office was bigger than most people's apartments, with windows offering a view of the entire city. The man himself was younger than David had expected, maybe 45, with the kind of confidence that comes from making billion-dollar decisions before breakfast. "Your artificial intelligence platform is impressive," Hamilton said, getting straight to the point. "But you're thinking too small. You're focused on helping individual companies when you could be reshaping entire economies," Hamilton outlined, his vision with the precision of someone who had thought through every detail. A consortium of international investors was prepared to acquire David's company for a sum that made his head spin. The number was so large that David had to ask Hamilton to repeat it twice to make sure he heard correctly, but the money was just the beginning. Hamilton showed David detailed plans for expanding the AI platform across Asia, starting with Singapore and spreading to every major market in the region. They would partner with governments, banks, and multinational corporations. Within 5 years, David's technology could be influencing economic decisions for over 2 billion people. "This isn't just about building a bigger company," Hamilton explained. "This is about creating a legacy that will outlast both of us. Your children's children will read about what we build together in history books." The offer came with one non-negotiable requirement. David would need to relocate to Singapore immediately to oversee the expansion personally. This wasn't something he could manage remotely or delegate to others. Hamilton made it clear that this level of opportunity required David's complete commitment and physical presence. "I need someone who can think on their feet in 17 different time zones," Hamilton said. "Someone who can have breakfast with government ministers in Singapore, lunch with tech leaders in Tokyo, and dinner with investors in Mumbai all in the same day. That person has to be you." David felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at possibilities he had never dared to imagine. The financial terms alone would make him one of the wealthiest people on the planet. The strategic opportunity would cement his place in business history. Everything he had worked for during those 16-hour days in his garage would finally reach its ultimate destination, but Hamilton wasn't finished. He pulled out a tablet and showed David what the competition was doing. 3 rival companies were developing similar AI platforms, and they were making aggressive moves to capture the Asian market. One of them had already secured partnerships with major banks in Hong Kong and Tokyo. "This window won't stay open forever," Hamilton warned. "If you don't move now, someone else will. And once they establish dominance in Asia, it will be nearly impossible to compete. You'll spend the rest of your career wondering what could have been." The pressure was intense, but David asked for time to consider the offer. Hamilton agreed to give him 2 weeks, but made it clear that this was a one-time opportunity. If David declined, the consortium would immediately begin negotiations with his competitors. During the flight home, David's mind raced with possibilities. He could picture himself in a corner office overlooking Singapore's harbor, making decisions that influenced markets across half the world. The lifestyle would be incredible: luxury apartments in multiple cities, access to private jets, invitations to exclusive events, where world leaders gathered to discuss the future of global commerce. But as the plane descended toward his home city, David felt a knot forming in his stomach. He thought about the conversation he would have to have with his wife and children. Moving to Singapore wasn't like relocating to another state. It would mean completely uprooting their lives and starting over in a foreign country. His wife's reaction was even worse than he had expected. She listened to his explanation in stunned silence, her face growing paler with each detail he shared. When he finished describing Hamilton's offer, she stared at him for a long moment before speaking. "You're talking about moving our entire family to the other side of the world for your business," she said quietly. "What about my career? What about the kids' schools? What about our life here?" David tried to explain the incredible opportunity, the financial security it would provide, the doors it would open for their children's futures. But his wife wasn't impressed by the numbers or the promises of luxury lifestyle. "I've already sacrificed my architectural career twice to support your dreams," she reminded him. "I gave up my partnership at the firm when we moved for your first expansion. I started over from scratch when we relocated again 3 years ago. Now you want me to throw away everything I've built again?" The argument that followed was the worst they had ever had. David accused his wife of not understanding the magnitude of the opportunity. She accused him of caring more about his reputation than his family's happiness. Both said things they immediately regretted, but the damage was done, their children's. Reactions were just as difficult to handle. His 8-year-old daughter burst into tears when she learned they might have to leave her best friends and her school. His 10-year-old son became angry and sullen, refusing to talk about the move or even listen to David's explanations about why it might be good for them. "I don't want to live somewhere different," his daughter sobbed. "I like my room and my friends. And my teacher, why can't your work stay here?" David found himself caught between 2 impossible choices. On one side was the opportunity of several lifetimes, financial freedom beyond imagination, the chance to build something truly historic, and recognition as one of the world's most successful entrepreneurs. On the other side was his family's happiness, stability, and the life they had built together. The pressure from his business partners made everything worse. His board of directors called an emergency meeting to discuss Hamilton's offer. Every single member urged David to accept immediately. They pointed out that turning down such an opportunity would be business suicide and could even trigger a shareholders' lawsuit. "You'd have to be crazy to walk away from this," one board member said bluntly. "This is the kind of deal that defines careers. In 10 years, you'll either be remembered as the genius who seized the moment or the fool who let it slip away." Meanwhile, Hamilton's team kept sending additional information designed to sweeten the deal. Private school arrangements for the children in Singapore, a luxury apartment with harbor views, access to exclusive clubs and social circles, job opportunities for David's wife with international architectural firms. They seemed to have an answer for every practical concern, but David's wife remained unmoved by these offers. She had reached her breaking point with the constant upheaval and uncertainty. For years, she had watched their family life take second place to David's business ambitions. The Singapore move felt like the final step in a process that had been gradually erasing their marriage and their children's childhood. "I can't do this anymore," she told David during another late-night argument. "I can't keep pretending that we're a family when we're really just people who happen to share the same address while you chase the next big deal." The ultimatum came on a Sunday morning when the kids were at their grandparents' house. David's wife sat him down at their kitchen table, the same table where they used to have family breakfasts before his schedule became too chaotic for regular meals together. "I need you to choose," she said, with a calmness that was more frightening than any argument. "You can have the Singapore deal and everything that comes with it, or you can have us. But you can't have both. I won't put our children through another move, another disruption, another few years of wondering when Daddy will be too busy to notice they exist." David stared at his wife, searching for some sign that this was just another negotiation, another problem that could be solved with the right combination of logic and compromise. But her expression told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't a business decision she was asking him to make. This was a choice about what kind of person he wanted to be and what kind of life he wanted to live. The deadline for Hamilton's offer was exactly 1 week away. 7 days to decide between the biggest opportunity in business history and the family that had supported him through every previous challenge. The wake-up call came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 4 days before David had to give Hamilton his final answer. His wife was shaking him awake, her voice filled with panic. "Something's wrong with her," she whispered urgently. "She's burning up and she can barely breathe." David stumbled out of bed to find his 8-year-old daughter struggling with a fever that had spiked dangerously high. Her breathing was shallow and labored, and her skin felt like it was on fire. They wrapped her in a blanket and rushed to the emergency room, David's heart pounding as he drove through empty streets at breakneck speed. The next 6 hours in the hospital waiting room were the longest of David's life. Doctors came and went, speaking in medical terms that David couldn't understand. His daughter had developed severe pneumonia, they explained, and her young lungs were struggling to fight off the infection. She would need to stay in the hospital for at least a week, possibly longer. As David sat beside his daughter's hospital bed, watching machines monitor her breathing and heart rate, he realized something that shook him to his core. He barely knew this little person who was fighting for her health just a few feet away from him. When the nurses asked about her medical history, he had to look to his wife for answers. He didn't know if his daughter was allergic to any medications. He couldn't remember when she had last been sick or what treatments had worked before. "What's her favorite book?" David asked his wife quietly while their daughter slept. His wife looked at him with surprise. "She's been reading the same series for months." "You walked past her reading it every night." David felt like he had been punched in the stomach. His daughter had been developing interests, making friends, learning new things, and growing up, but he had been too busy building his empire to notice any of it. He was like a stranger visiting someone else's child in the hospital over the next 3 days. David learned things about his daughter that he should have known years ago. She loved drawing horses and wanted to take riding lessons. Her best friend was a girl named Lucy who lived 2 streets away. She was afraid of thunderstorms but loved to watch lightning from the window. She wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up because she thought animals needed someone to speak for them. Each new piece of information felt like evidence of how much of his daughter's life he had missed. While he was negotiating million-dollar contracts, she was losing her first tooth. While he was flying to international conferences, she was learning to ride a bicycle. While he was building his reputation as a business genius, his daughter was becoming a complete person who barely knew her own father. His wife barely left the hospital during those 3 days. She slept in an uncomfortable chair beside their daughter's bed, refusing David's suggestions that she go home to rest. When he offered to take turns keeping watch, she just looked at him with exhausted eyes. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "I've been doing this alone for years already. When she had the flu last winter, you were in California for a product launch. When she broke her arm at school, you were in a board meeting and couldn't be reached. I'm used to handling the scary moments by myself." The words hit David harder than any business failure ever could. He realized that his wife had been carrying the entire emotional weight of their family while he chased success. She had been the one to comfort the children during nightmares, handle school problems, and worry about their health and happiness. David had been providing financial support, but his wife had been providing everything else that mattered. On the 4th day, when their daughter was finally stable enough to go home, David made a discovery that changed everything. While helping her pack up the drawings she had made in the hospital, he found a picture she had drawn of their family. It showed Mommy holding hands with both children, all 3 of them standing in front of their house. Off to one side, barely visible in the corner of the paper, was a tiny stick figure of Daddy talking on a phone. "Why did you draw Daddy so small?" David asked gently. His daughter looked up at him with eyes that seemed older than her 8 years. "Because you're always far away," she said simply. "Even when you're in the same room, you feel far away." That night, after they brought her home and she was sleeping safely in her own bed, David's wife found him sitting in his office staring at his daughter's drawing. She sat down across from him, and for the first time in months, they had a real conversation. "I can't do this anymore," she said, but her voice was tired rather than angry. "I've been thinking about this for weeks, and I've already talked to a lawyer." David looked up sharply. "A lawyer? About what?" "About divorce," she said quietly. "I don't want to hurt you or destroy what you've built, but I can't keep pretending we have a marriage when I'm basically a single mother who lives in the same house as someone who pays the bills." The word divorce hit David like a physical blow. He had known things were bad, but he had always assumed they could work through their problems once his business stabilized. He had never seriously considered that his wife might actually leave him. "I don't want our children to grow up thinking that this is what love looks like," she continued. "I don't want them to believe that caring about someone means always putting them second. I don't want our daughter to marry someone like you, and I don't want our son to become someone like you." David tried to argue, to explain that everything he was doing was for them, but his wife held up a hand to stop him. "You keep saying it's for us, but it's not," she said. "It's for you. It's for your ego, your ambition. You need to prove something to the world. We're just the excuse you use to make yourself feel better about choosing work over everything else." The conversation continued past midnight, with David finally understanding how deeply his choices had damaged his family. His wife explained how lonely she had become, how she had stopped sharing her thoughts and feelings with him because he was always distracted. She talked about how the children had learned not to expect him at important events because disappointment had become too painful. "I used to make excuses for you," she said. "I would tell the kids that Daddy was working hard to give us a good life. But they're not stupid. They know that other parents find ways to balance work and family. They know that being successful doesn't have to mean being absent." Meanwhile, the business pressure was becoming unbearable. Hamilton's deadline was approaching, and David's board of directors were growing impatient with his hesitation. Stock prices had started fluctuating as rumors spread about the Singapore deal and David's commitment to the company. His competitors were circling like sharks, sensing blood in the water. One rival company announced a partnership with a major Asian bank, clearly trying to position themselves as the alternative if David rejected Hamilton's offer. Business journalists started writing articles questioning whether David still had the ruthless focus that had built his empire. During an emergency board meeting, David's own executives began questioning his leadership for the first time. They wondered aloud whether he was having some kind of midlife crisis or breakdown. Some suggested that perhaps it was time to consider replacing him with someone who wouldn't hesitate to seize such an obvious opportunity. "I've never seen anyone overthink a decision like this," one board member said bluntly. "This is the easiest yes in business history. What's wrong with you?" David left that meeting feeling like he was being torn in half. Everything he had worked for was hanging in the balance, waiting for him to make a decision that felt impossible to make. If he chose Singapore, he would lose his family but secure his place in business history. If he chose his family, he would be giving up the opportunity of several lifetimes and possibly destroying the company he had built from nothing. That weekend, David found himself alone in his office once again, staring out at the city skyline. But this time, instead of feeling like he was on top of the world, he felt like he was trapped in a glass tower, separated from everything that truly mattered. The awards on his walls, the recognition from business magazines, the invitations to exclusive events, none of it felt meaningful anymore. He picked up his daughter's hospital drawing and studied the tiny figure of himself in the corner. That's who he had become, a small, distant presence in his own family's life. The successful businessman who could predict market trends and negotiate billion-dollar deals couldn't tell you his daughter's favorite color or his son's biggest fear. For the first time since building his empire, David wondered if he had been measuring success all wrong. Maybe being on top of the world didn't mean anything if you were standing there alone. Maybe the most important victories weren't the ones that made headlines or impressed investors. As he sat there in his empty office on a Sunday evening, with Hamilton's deadline just 3 days away, David realized that he had already lost the most important competition of his life. The question now was whether it was too late to try to win it back. The alarm clock showed 5:47 a.m. when David woke up on the day he had to give Hamilton his final answer. He had barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and thinking about the choice that would define the rest of his life. In just a few hours, he would walk into the most important meeting of his career, and he still didn't know what he was going to say. David found his wife in the kitchen, already dressed and making coffee. She looked up when he entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The tension between them had been building for days, and they both knew that whatever happened in today's meeting would determine the future of their marriage. "I know you." "Have to go?" she said quietly, handing him a cup of coffee. "Just remember that whatever you decide, there's no going back. Some doors close forever once you walk through them." David wanted to tell her that he had already made his decision, that he knew what mattered most, but the words wouldn't come. Part of him was still thinking about Hamilton's offer, about the billions of dollars and the chance to build something that would change the world. The businessman in him couldn't quite let go of the opportunity. Even though his heart was pulling him in a different direction, the drive to his office felt like the longest trip of David's life. Every red light gave him more time to think, and every mile brought him closer to the moment when he would have to choose between two completely different futures. He thought about his daughter's drawing, with the tiny figure of Daddy in the corner. He thought about his son asking why Daddy never came to his games anymore. He thought about his wife sitting alone at their anniversary dinner, waiting for him to show up. But he also thought about Hamilton's presentation, about the chance to build something legendary. The rational part of his mind kept calculating the financial benefits, the career opportunities, the recognition that would come with accepting the Singapore deal. This was the kind of opportunity that came along once in a lifetime. How could he just walk away from it? The boardroom was packed when David arrived. Hamilton had flown in from Singapore specifically for this meeting, along with 2 other investors, who represented billions of dollars in potential funding. David's own board members were there, all of them expecting him to sign the papers that would seal the biggest deal in the company's history. Hamilton stood up when David entered. extending his hand with a confident smile. "I hope you've had time to think about our offer," he said. "I'm excited to hear your decision." David shook Hamilton's hand and took his seat at the head of the conference table. The contract was already laid out in front of him, dozens of pages, filled with legal language that would transfer ownership of his company and commit him to 5 years in Singapore. All he had to do was sign his name, and he would become one of the wealthiest people on the planet. "Before we begin," David said slowly, "I want to thank everyone for the incredible opportunity you've presented. The financial terms are generous, and the strategic vision is impressive." Hamilton nodded approvingly, sensing that David was building up to accepting the offer. The board members leaned forward, eager to hear the words that would secure their own financial futures. The lawyers had their pens ready to witness the signature that would make headlines around the world. "However," David continued, and the word hung in the air like a thunderclap. The smile faded from Hamilton's face, and the board members exchanged worried glances. "I'm going to have to decline your offer." The silence that followed was deafening. Hamilton stared at David as if he had spoken in a foreign language. One board member actually dropped his pen, and David could hear it rolling across the table in the quiet room. "I'm sorry," Hamilton said slowly. "Did you just say you're declining?" "That's right," David replied, pushing the unsigned contract back toward Hamilton. "I appreciate everything you've offered, but I can't accept a deal that requires me to uproot my family and spend the next 5 years on the other side of the world." What happened next was even more shocking than David's decision to decline the Singapore offer. He stood up and addressed his board of directors, who were staring at him like he had lost his mind. "Effective immediately, I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations," David announced. "I'll remain as chairman, but I'm promoting Jennifer to CEO. She's been running most of the company anyway, and she's more than capable of taking it to the next level." The room erupted in chaos. Board members started talking over each other, demanding explanations and threatening legal action. Hamilton stood up abruptly, his face red with anger and disbelief. "You're making the biggest mistake of your career," Hamilton said coldly. "This deal won't be available tomorrow. When you realize what you've thrown away, don't come crawling back to me." But David felt strangely calm as the storm raged around him. For the first time in years, he had made a decision based on what felt right rather than what looked good on paper. The numbers didn't make sense, and the business journals would probably call him crazy, but David knew he was finally making the right choice. "I understand your disappointment," David replied to Hamilton, "but I've realized that some things are more valuable than money or recognition. I've been so focused on building an empire that I forgot what I was building it for." The meeting ended with Hamilton and his team storming out, promising to take their offer to David's competitors. Half of David's board members resigned on the spot, unable to understand how someone could walk away from such an opportunity. The financial media would spend weeks analyzing David's decision, with most experts concluding that he had suffered some kind of breakdown. But David didn't care about any of that. As he drove home in the middle of the day for the first time in years, he had called ahead to let his wife know he was coming, but he hadn't explained what had happened in the meeting. He wanted to tell her in person. He found his family in the backyard where his wife was helping their daughter plant flowers in the garden while their son practiced kicking a soccer ball against the fence. They all looked up in surprise when David walked through the gate in his business suit. "You're home early," his wife said cautiously. "How did the meeting go?" "I turned it down," David said simply. "All of it. The Singapore deal, the billions of dollars, everything." His wife stared at him for a long moment, searching his face to see if he was serious. When she realized he meant it, her eyes filled with tears, but David couldn't tell if they were happy tears or sad ones. "Are you sure?" she asked. "This is what you've been working toward your whole career." "No," David replied, looking at his children playing in the garden. "This is what I've been working toward. I just forgot that for a while." The transition wasn't easy. David had to learn how to be a father and husband again after years of putting work first. His daughter was initially suspicious when he started showing up for bedtime stories. wondering if Daddy would disappear again once the novelty wore off. His son was confused when David began attending soccer practices. Having grown accustomed to Mommy being the only parent in the stands, David's wife remained cautious for months, waiting to see if the change was permanent or just another phase. She had been hurt too many times by broken promises and missed events to trust immediately that things would be different. But gradually the family began to heal. David learned his daughter's favorite books and started reading them to her every night. He became an assistant coach for his son's soccer team and never missed another game. He and his wife began taking walks together in the evenings, talking about their days and rediscovering the connection they had lost. The business world reacted exactly as David had expected. His competitors seized the opportunity to expand into Asian markets, and some business magazines wrote scathing articles about his career suicide. Stock prices dropped temporarily as investors questioned the company's future direction, but something interesting happened over the following months. With David stepping back from daily operations, his executive team was forced to develop better systems and processes. The company actually became more efficient without his constant micromanagement. His successor as CEO brought fresh ideas and perspectives that led to innovations David never would have considered. A year later, David found himself in a very different place. His net worth was significantly lower than it could have been, and he was no longer invited to the exclusive conferences where world leaders discussed global business strategy. The financial magazines had moved on to writing about other entrepreneurs who were making headlines, but David had never been happier. He coached his daughter's little league team and taught his son how to change the oil in a car. He and his wife took their first real vacation in 5 years, leaving their phones at home and spending 2 weeks just enjoying each other's company. He learned to measure success not by quarterly reports and stock prices, but by good-night hugs and family dinners and weekend mornings spent reading the newspaper in bed. The most profound moment came on a Saturday afternoon when David was helping his daughter with a school project about heroes. She had chosen to write about him, not because he was a successful businessman, but because he had chosen his family over everything else. "My daddy used to be very busy," she wrote in her careful handwriting.